you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Give me a full ballerina skirt and a hint of saloon, and I'm on board.
I can't go back.
Welcome to the She Became Visible podcast. I'm your host, Renee Steelman. This podcast is my story. It's your story. It's our story. It's all the stories of all the women who one day knew that it was time to remember who they were, who they are, and stand up and be seen. Good morning. Welcome to She Became Visible. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go over here and make sure that I have the comments turned on. Oh, yes. Thank you, Coco B. Thanks for joining us this morning. And tell your friends to get online right now and listen. Today, I'm going to issue one of those very annoying things that people say nowadays, which is I'm going to tell you a trigger warning. And I have to admit, I have lived a pretty privileged life, I must say. I had a pretty good childhood. I'm kind of going through some things right now as I'm looking back and reflecting back on some certain things, but nothing, hugely traumatic. And so I didn't really understand this whole idea of trauma or trigger warnings. And so I and I also read a fabulous book by Roxane Gay, where she talks a lot about trigger warnings. And it's a great book. It's called Bad Feminist. You have to read it. And she had a lot to say about trigger warnings. And I kind of agreed with her. But I had an experience where after the death of my son, I tried finding this video, but couldn't. Okay, dang it. Have you found it now? Let me know if you found it. Anyway, when our son died, he just kind of died in my arms on Christmas morning, 2 years ago, 2022. And we had to call, 911, and the fire department came and the paramedics came and they started doing CPR. And so that was, it was an interesting experience. And, but then this last year, my husband and I went to just a fun little snowmobiling thing. And when we walked into the place to rent our snowmobiles, there was a class going on CPR, and they were up at the front teaching CPR, and they had a dummy and they were performing CPR on this dummy. And I remember going, and I was just like, it's like I got it. And it was it was like, type of experience. It wasn't like anything too traumatic that I know a lot of, but I understood. Okay. I'm just saying I understood. And so much of life is if you haven't experienced something, you don't understand it. You can have empathy, you can have sympathy, but you really don't understand it unless you've gone through it. And I'm learning that as I'm aging and as my children are aging and my grandchildren are aging and my husband's, retired and our life changes and life happens, right? And so we learn through experience. And that's one of the beautiful things about getting older, which is why the demographic for this show is women who have found themselves in their third act, and how they're reflecting back, and they're looking over their life and they're going, I think I need to make some changes. And I have a lot of life experience now, and I can look back and go, I'm going to make some changes now. And that's where we're going. So anyway, I want to start out by giving you that trigger warning. And then I want to start out by sharing with you my good friend, Julia, who I've had on my show. She is amazing. And if you don't watch anything else on TikTok, you need to watch Analyzing Mormonism with Julia. And she shared something this last couple of days that I want to share with you. So let me bring her on. I keep forgetting I took my mouse out, so I have to use. Okay, here we go.
For the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for failing to report child sexual abuse. Under Pennsylvania's Child Protective Services Law, which dates to 1975 but expanded to 2014, which afterwards included more categories for mandated reporters, Rhett Hines was a mandated reporter. The abuser's name is Sean Corey Gooden, and he served as a bishop in his ward. He was charged in 2022 and 2023 with sexually assaulting minors between the ages of 8 and 12. One instance occurred in 1997 and 2 occurred in 2000. So Bishop Gooden assaulted 3 children. Stake President Rhett Hines became aware of the abuse as early as October 2020, while Sean Gooden was still a bishop and 2 years before he was arrested. Shortly after all this was made public, the church made the following statement. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints works actively to prevent abuse.
Okay, you're having a laugh.
Our hearts ache for victims of abuse, and the church is committed to addressing such incidents wherever they are found. Yet when Bishop Nick Jones called the church's law firm to report the abuse of a the church told him to stand down.
Because I had evidence from an email that this man was the McConkey law firm, Curtin McConkey law firm, told me to stand down.
And when Bishop Jed Cassing reported child abuse to the police, he got in trouble with the church's law firm for not calling them first.
Even after we called the police, I was chastised for not calling Curtin and McConkey first and letting them deal with it.
The church's statement continues. The church trains its leaders and supports their lawful efforts. The charges now brought by local prosecutors for failing to report the abuse are misguided, and the church will vigorously defend him. Yesterday, Mormon Stories released an episode that consisted of a panel of 4 bishops, and each one of them said that they were only trained in one thing: how to count, report, and turn in the funds. And when Bishop Nick Jones resigned from the pulpit, the only instruction given to his counselors by the stake president was, don't let him collect the tithing. That was it, nothing else. Of all the truth claims, of all the messy history with polygamy, racism, and the church hiding their funds, I would argue that the worst thing about Mormonism is their inability to protect the children.
There you go. And, you know, it goes back down into the patriarchy. And I would have to say that my experience in the church, and one of the reasons why I found church history so disturbing, is my experience with patriarchy. And this is just an exploded version of patriarchy. When you take the value of men, it's almost as if we are living in the Old Testament times, where women and children are property and chattel. And we are here for men to do what they wish with. And I'm not a man hater. I have 4 sons. I have a fabulous husband. I had a fabulous stepfather. There are beautiful men out there, but there also are beautiful men that this religion turns, where they have to put their integrity and their morality aside to serve the people above them. And I just listened to a fabulous podcast that was talking about the masculinity issue that's going on. And they really brought to my attention how a lot of times the abuse that happens on lower levels, like bishops and even stake presidents, is because of the hierarchy. They have to prove their masculinity on the way down because of the people above them that are maybe not treating them with as much respect as they should. So they take out that is in almost a form of retaliation, where I will use my power where I can use my power. It was something I never really thought of. But my guest today is probably the most fabulous person you're ever going to meet. And her name is Kristy Johnson. And I was introduced to her and told about a documentary that her and her family produced. It's on Prime Video. It's called No Crime in Sin. And it's available today. I think it's like $2 to rent. So as soon as you're done here, that's what you're doing this afternoon. But Kristy has a story to tell, and it's a personal story of hers. So no one can dispute what happened to her. This is her experience, and she's going to share her experience with us today. And the thing I love the most about her is she is my exact demographic, a woman over the age of 60 who is thriving, who is giving back service to her community in spite of what happened to her, and actually taking what happened to her to serve her community. So let me stop talking. I'm going to bring Kristy on right now. And good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Oh my gosh. And you guys, if you have not watched the documentary, we're not only going to talk a little bit about what Kristy experienced as a child, as a teen, as a young adult, as an adult, But we're also going to talk about what happened to her family while they were making this documentary, soon after they made the documentary, leading up to the documentary. It's mind-boggling, the trauma that you have gone through. And to see you and your sister, this is going to be a hard one to get through, but to see you and your sister and your brother in that documentary, and then to find out that not too soon after, that beautiful sister of yours died. And then to hear that your mother had died and your brother had died. And on top of everything else that happened. And then here you are sitting beautiful with this smile, serving people in your community. So introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your story. I don't know how far back you want to go. Where do you fall in? I'm assuming this is a family of 6. Is it 4 girls and 2 boys?
Yeah. Yeah, and let me just clarify something really quick too. We, because you said that our family produced the film. This film was
Yeah.
done. That's okay. Yeah, the film was directed and produced by Vivani Productions. Jared
Yes.
Ruga, the executive producer, and then Amanda Stoddard is the one who directed it. They are an Emmy award-winning team that won a Daytime Emmy for Quiet Heroes, which is another powerful documentary that they did, which was going on at the same time that they were filming us. So they've been to Sundance and everything. I love them, and I will always be close to them. So, but yeah, you had asked a question. What was the original question? I'm so sorry.
Well, now that you say that, talk about how you were connected to them and how you were introduced to them so that they could help you tell the story.
Yeah, we were just in a place in our lives where we had just buried our mom, and my brother Kevin really wanted to meet with our father along with us kids because he was really upset with the way my mother passed away. And so, yeah, it's just, the universe kind of stepped in, and it was very interesting. I met up with an old friend online, Michelle Snow, who I had known as a little girl, who my dad was in the bishopric with. Her dad was our bishop, and she was sharing what happened to her. And I reached out to her, and she told me about Restore Our Humanity and told me to give them a call, and they help a lot of people. And so I did, and I was put in touch with Mark Lawrence, who is wonderful and was also featured in another documentary out of Utah, and a very powerful person, just wonderful. And anyway, he knew the filmmakers and that they were looking, perhaps to make a film. I was put in touch with Jared Ruga, and he basically, when he talked to me, he wanted to know what kind of evidence did we have? Because a lot of times when people are sharing their story, so many people have been through this, but, I had been collecting records and documents and everything you can imagine for well over, like a couple decades. So I produced that for him, and he was shocked and went, would you be willing to make a film, and let's start filming and talking. So that's how that kind of came about. Then we were able to, my brother Kevin died, who was the one who really wanted to meet with my father and have him answer for himself. And my brother Kim and all of us, we had written a letter to my dad and asked him if we could meet with him. And he agreed. And we told him, what kind of questions we were going to need to have answered. He agreed to that. And then, long story short, the film people, we told them about our meeting coming up, and they asked if they could film it and if our father would be willing to sit down. And surprisingly, he was. He said, absolutely. And, so we didn't ambush him. We didn't do anything like that. It was set up very beautifully. We had already buried our mom and had this beautiful spiritual experience of forgiveness and love with that. So we were going into this meeting, with the intent to get some closure and some answers, and to also give him an opportunity to come clean. And so he should have been prepared for that. He wasn't some poor soul that was just ambushed and we walked into his house. He got mic'd.
Yeah.
It was all, he knew what was going on. And so we had high hopes.
Yeah, and I think some of the people are asking, how long it had been since you had spoken, and how old was he? And so let's because a lot of things had happened before this documentary was made, and it took a while to get him excommunicated. It took a while for people to acknowledge what he had done. So the time from what he was younger when all of this happened, and then he moved on with his life. And then this documentary was made when he was quite in his, he was what, in his 80s?
Yeah, I think he was, late 70s at that
Yeah,
particular time. And he had
right,
already, like, my mom had divorced him years earlier
right.
after we had made police reports, and then he married one of his students. And then they made a life for themselves in Lehigh, Utah.
Yeah,
And then he had been rebaptized. He was only excommunicated for like a year or something. And
right,
he was fired from the church education system as an educator. And then, yeah, he married right away.
right. So that's the thing. When people see the documentary, if they don't know a lot of the background, they would assume that you three kids walked in on this 83-year-old man with a tremor and with a kind, repentant heart, who admitted that he had abused all four of his daughters. Did he abuse the boys at all?
Well, first of all, there's three of us girls.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and oh, that was what you had asked me
Yes,
originally.
yes, yes, yes. How many
So
girls?
I
How many
always
boys?
compare it to the Brady Bunch. I know that's old
Oh,
fashioned, but so it went boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. So my older
oh.
brother, Kevin, the one who passed away, is the
So
one
he
who
was,
wanted this. He
and
was
he
the
was the
first.
oldest. Okay.
Right. And then
Okay.
he's a year and a half older than me. So then there's me.
Okay.
And then my brother Kim, who's in the film. And then I
Okay.
have a sister Corey, who did not want to be a part of the film. And
Okay.
then I have a brother Kyle, who did not want to be a part of that. And then I
Okay.
have Kathy. She's
Okay.
our youngest sister.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. That's a good timeline. So, but they had not experienced or seen or were aware, the boys were not aware of the abuse. He was able to just abuse the girls, but your
I
mother
will,
found out about it.
yeah, I will state that there were four of us victims in the family.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so what I don't think they understand is, and especially the scene in the movie where the neighbor comes over and grabs his hand and who's here for you, and he's like nobody, and then you go on, and I'm just jumping all over the place and I'm getting ahead of myself,
It's totally
but
fine.
to see the sympathy and the empathy for this man, and when he told him what happened, it was like, well, that was they, even the women, even the sweet little neighbor lady with her 3-year-old that was running in and out of the house was like, well, that was in the past. You're an old man now. You're not dangerous anymore. And anyway, it's an amazing documentary. You have to go and watch it to get the timeline. But so let's go back. So Kevin was the oldest. As you said, he died. He's kind of the one that got the ball rolling as far as we're going to do this. And then you're like, yeah, okay, we're going to do this. And then he got an infection, and it
Yeah, he
went.
just went into the hospital because he was having pain in his hip,
Yeah,
and they found out he had an isolated infection. So they were taking care of that. They admitted him. And I think it was like 4 days later, they had to do emergency open heart surgery. And before they could even operate, they had wheeled him in and he coded right on the table. They waited too long, it was spreading all over and
yeah,
they didn't catch it. And the fact that he died in that manner was very shocking. And, we had just buried our mother 5 months earlier. He had done the funeral. It was amazing because when he was dedicating her grave, he asked God, to restore our family back to
oh,
where we had been before our father committed crimes against us. So we thought that was so profound. And so we were reuniting with, our other siblings, and everything just seemed like, wow, this is an answer to prayer,
yeah.
and then we're going to see our dad. Maybe there's going to be healing there. And then he died. And talk about a big, it was crazy, and very overwhelming. And so many people loved him and adored him. He was just a solid, solid, good person.
And
And he had
he was
experienced a lot.
he was 46. Is
He
that
was
right?
53.
He was 53.
And he was
Okay.
in great shape. I mean, he
Yeah.
was teaching basketball and he had just finished up his degree. He had waited years.
Oh,
He finished up his degree. He had not even walked the graduation. Like he had
oh,
finished his last exam and then he passed. So there was so many things that were kind of just left there hanging, when he died. But yeah, so that kind of really reinforced, me and Kim and
right,
Kathy to
right,
like go for it. And the
right.
film company was just wonderful and very respectful and kind. And they were very excited to be able to, capture this moment of like healing. Like that was our expectation,
Right.
like we wanted answers. We weren't there to be horrible. We never treated him disrespectfully, you
Mm-mm.
know. So there wasn't an ambush or secret record. It was just literally on the up and up. And that's what people don't realize is, he did have a tremor for quite a long time. It runs in his family.
Hmm.
And, he's even had surgery since then to take that away. So
Wow.
he's actually flourishing. I saw him in
Yeah.
a deposition and he's doing
That's
great.
that was interesting because my stepfather, let's see, I was 11 when my mom married my stepfather, and they have a child, my half brother. They have one boy, and my grandmother from England, because my stepfather was from England. My grandmother from England flew over to see the prince that's going to carry on the name, and she had a tremor, and there wasn't anything associated with, just like you said, it was just a genetic thing, and her head would just shake. And as my dad got older, I noticed he started to get that same tremor. It wasn't related to Parkinson's or anything like that. It was just, like you said, a genetic tremor. And I just thought genetics are so amazing. But in the documentary, if you don't know the whole story, it really helps his cause, I have to say, because it makes
Yeah,
him
and
look
there
like
were times where he got emotional, and then
yes,
there's other things like, you know, that people, of course, they didn't get to see a lot of the behind the scenes and how he acted sometimes, which was really interesting,
yeah.
you
You
know.
mentioned in the thing where he would, if confronted, his whole demeanor would change, and all of a sudden
Yeah,
this other personality would come out. We'll talk about that.
yeah,
So your sister Kathy, the baby of the family, had repressed memories, and
yes.
you talk about how when she was told basically that she was assaulted, abused, she didn't remember it at first.
Well, in the film, she talks about because she was in junior high at the time when the social worker came,
Okay.
because there had been somebody was reporting that things were going on, that they had seen some stuff going on. So it wasn't our family reporting at the time, but we had
Oh,
reported
was it
when
a
I was
neighbor?
6
Did
to
you
the
ever find
bishop.
out? Did you
Huh?
ever find out who it was? That was it a neighbor or like a
It was
somebody?
one of my sister's friends at school, the
Oh,
middle sister, Corey. She was a cheerleader and one of her friends. And then during that time, Corey, yeah, there's a story about Corey running away from home. And, while I was on my mission, there was a lot of stuff happening. But I want to make it really clear that we started turning in my father like when I was 6, like my mother
okay.
went to the bishop. And
Okay.
my dad was very young and vibrant then, And so the
Yes.
church knew from the get go. And then, they just kept him going. And my mother was told to go home and be a better wife and mother. And,
Okay,
you
so
know,
let's start there. So you were 6. So your brother is 18, about 18 months older than you.
he
So
was
he's like
7, yeah,
seven
seven
and
and
a
a half.
half. And I have a couple of those 18-month-old kids. And the older I get, the more I'm like, okay, now how were you born in 79 and you were born in 80? How does
Yeah.
that
How
work?
did
I
that?
have to do the girl math. But anyway, so your mother finds out and she immediately takes action. What a beautiful woman that she immediately took action. She's got 6 kids.
She
Like
didn't
you
have
say,
6 at the time. She had
oh,
4
that's right. That's right.
because the
That's
other
right.
2
Because
weren't
you
even born
moved.
yet.
That's right. So she's got 4 kids. She goes, and I love this. This is what we do as people in any kind of a fundamental, high demand religion. Instead of going to the police, the first thing she did was go to her clerical leader, right? So she goes to the bishop, and the bishop says to her, what?
He didn't have he had a hard time believing it, but he did say, you know, that we can't make the church look bad. First of all, your, your husband's an educator. You guys promised when you signed on
Yeah.
because they have to make a promise not to make the church look bad. And that's really important. And so there was that extra layer, that my parents had already promised the church. So he told her, do not report this to the police. I'll talk to your husband or whatever. But, she was told to go home and be a better wife and mother. And, maybe he wouldn't have to turn to his children if she took care of business.
Oh,
Yeah. So yeah,
so
it was
again,
very
it's her
confusing
fault.
for
She
my
might
mother
not be
because she
serving
was a
him.
convert. She was a convert to the church, but my mother was very dedicated and totally believed that these bishops, are very inspired by God, like most Mormons do. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of great bishops out there that are wonderful, but
Right.
a lot of them are not. And they're following instructions on how to deal with child abuse. And
Right.
so that's what my mom did. She came home and things got worse, and my dad was moved around a lot if my mother reported to his bosses. So she went from reporting to the bishop to his educational bosses. And
And he worked in the church education system,
yeah,
and you were living at the time. I'm trying to remember. So
Ogden.
so you were in Ogden. So he's teaching in a school. He's teaching
Seminary.
seminary in the
Yeah.
school system because that's what they do there. I lived in the
Yeah.
Midwest, so we had seminary in my in my basement, and by a nice guy in the ward. So we didn't get that inclusion thing with school. So he's teaching CES, as you mentioned. He and your mother, when he was called, had to make a promise that they would never say or do anything that would make the church look bad. I think that's interesting as
Correct.
part of a job,
I know. And the
Yeah.
thing is, after that, like after there were 2 reports made, and then they transferred our family to Provo, Utah, and then made him an educator at Brigham Young University. And so,
Did they do
which
that because they thought if we get him away from the little children at seminary,
it
you
could
know,
be.
but
It is interesting that he went from teaching kids that were like troubled youth, because he was specifically assigned to kids who were like in, foster care. And also, he was very specific on who he was assigned to work with in seminary. But then, yeah, he was switched over to Brigham Young University, and, the abuse continued. He also, I was abused in the seminary building in Ogden as a little kid, having to go there after kindergarten and first grade. And I'd sit in his class with him, with all the students, which I loved doing. And then, at Brigham Young University in his office there, and then we go to the basketball games and stuff like that. But, the church, my mother finally, she went to the leaders that be at Brigham Young University and reported there, and really hardcore reported. Like, she freaked out and said, "You got to stop this." And instead of them stepping in and having there be a report to the police, they transferred our family out to Southern California and basically demoted him to be an institute teacher, where he would now teach at an institute building across from a community college. And still with college students, still employed, and just kind of a hush hush thing. And then we got transferred to Orange County, where he was made the director of one of the institutes there in Huntington Beach. And then he was serving at several institutes there across from different colleges. And yeah, so there had been reporting the whole time. So it wasn't a big secret to the church.
Yeah. And which bishop was it that said to your husband that the title of the documentary, "It's not a crime, it's a sin"?
Well, that here's the thing: is that whole the title of the documentary was actually figured out by the producer and director of the film. Because when my brother sits across from my dad and said, "So in your church court, did they tell you, to go and turn yourself into the criminal justice system, like report yourself to the police as part of your repentance?" And he was like, "Oh no, they never said that." So Kim's like, "So they made it about sin and not a crime?" And my dad goes, "Yeah." And so the directors were like, "Oh my God, that's a
And
good."
that's exactly how he thought of it, is that it was a sin and he had repented and so it was
And
so. Go ahead.
Oh, he was shown a lot of mercy even when this all came out in Orange County, because we had made police reports.
Mm.
We finally went to the police. The church was very upset. We got in a lot of
Mhm.
trouble with the church. But this was after my mission, and my sisters were still very young. And we all went and made police reports, separate ones.
Mm.
And the church stepped in. They came in to pick up my father. They told my mother they were on their way, and she called the stake president, and they hid my father out, from getting picked up. That came directly from my mom, because we never even told my mom we went to the police.
Yeah.
So she knew. And when the police called her, so the church started intervening really hardcore. And my dad was on the high council at the time. So there's all this mercy and love shown to my dad. And my mother is not only ostracized from a lot of people at church, but when she reached out, because when my dad got fired, we're talking health insurance for the kids still, and she reached out to my dad's boss and pled with them. I was there for the phone call and said, please, I still need insurance for my kids. We need help. And he said, he was the employee,
Mm.
not you.
Mhm.
And that was devastating to my mother. And I sat there with my jaw open, like, oh my gosh, what did we do to our family?
Mhm.
Because now there's all this going on. And so, interestingly enough, and well, I probably shouldn't even say what happened to that man, because he sustained a very bad injury that paralyzed him
Mhm.
right after that happened. And a lot of things happened with leaders that were just, my mom talked to one of the high councilman's wives, who was a really good friend of hers. And she was saying, oh my gosh, what is the church going to do? Like, is somebody going to do something? And he found out she was talking to my mom, her husband. He
Oh.
called my mother and he said, you do not talk about this. You keep your mouth shut. And I was there for that phone call. So my mother was also getting ostracized, but they were surrounding my father with all sorts of love and support. And, we got a copy of his diary as part of the evidence in, the lawsuit. And he kept a very strong diary during that time about his church court. And, I happened to, which was interesting, that one of my bishops at the time, that this is years later, pulled me aside at church and he said, I feel like I need to share something with you. And he said, I was down at the church or the state building one night, and they needed to have this church court for your dad to excommunicate him. And he said they needed an extra person in there. So they just said, you're a bishop. Could you just come on in and be part of the council, for this court? So he said, because I got the insight and was there during the court, I want to share with you what happened. And I thought, he told me, your dad got up there when they were asking him, like, why did you sexually assault your kids? And he said, well, I never felt close to my wife. And, we struggled with intimacy. And he said, Kristy, and this is the bishop talking, Kristy, it finally made sense to us. Why would your dad do something like that? So it made sense to us now why he had to turn to you kids. And I'm sitting there doing your look.
Yeah.
And I just sat there looking at him, and he saw my expression and he took off. Because I thought, you guys sat there and embraced him and gave him that chance to make an excuse.
It all made sense. It all made sense to them then.
Like, right. And it's like, so that's how the church was looking at it. And in my dad's diary, he speaks of, the love, and they all hugged me and embraced me, and they were helping him get another job. He had the stake president write him a letter of recommendation to teach in a junior high or middle school. Yeah. And he got the job teaching at a middle school for a while. And I was like, what is happening? This is crazy. And in the meantime, we're getting comments at church, like, well, your sister seduced him.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
was just like, what is happening? Like, you think you report it to the police, you think you come forward and that you're going to have a tremendous amount of support.
Hmm.
And one thing people have to remember is you have no control over one, how people react because they're carrying
Right.
their own trauma.
Yeah.
So the church, we know what that's all about now. And then three, the criminal justice system didn't do their job, you know,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
can't control that either. You can just do the best you can.
And I think that's the most startling thing that I'm starting to realize as I get older, and as there's a 24-hour news cycle, and we're watching different kinds of things, interactions that people have with the police, that if you think you're being protected, or if you think the judicial system is going to protect you, it's not going to. And I'm starting to see this over and over again. And talk a little bit about what you said after your parents finally got divorced. Now, where were the kids when they finally got divorced? Were there still young children at home? I think you said that there were.
Yeah, Kathy, my sister Corey, and my sister Kyle were all minors still.
Okay.
And, even when they got divorced, my dad purposely stayed truly unemployed because he didn't want to pay child support, and so he didn't pay any spousal support to my mom. She didn't get child support. Um, so it was weird, like the whole court system and criminal stuff. And there wasn't that kind of support. So, yeah. So what ended up happening is, my mom really lost
Yeah.
it. And she ended up kicking me, Kathy, and Kyle out of the house one day without anything. And we had nowhere to go. A lot of people in the church would not help us. And we ended up literally walking around town looking for a place to sleep for the night. And were taken in by some friends I grew up with that were renting a home and said you could stay on our couch, as long as you need. And then, you know, Kathy actually ended up going into foster care for a little bit because
Wow.
her mother lost it.
She just lost her mind.
She boarded up
Yeah.
windows, wouldn't let us in. She just,
A mental breakdown.
yeah.
Just, yeah. And where were you living when the divorce happened? And
We were in Orange County.
so you're in
right when our
California.
divorce was final, he had an immediate wedding
Oh.
to his student because they
Oh.
were already dating. He got set up by some people, like the high council people or whatever.
Oh,
And
that's so
so
nice.
what was interesting is my brother Kevin called me and he goes, "Are you sitting down?" And I'm like, "Sure." And he goes, "You're not going to believe it, but Dad's getting married." And I was like, who would marry a pedophile?
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, right?" And I said, "Well, where's the wedding going to be?" And I found out where it was. And one of my friends and I staked it out, because I'm like, I got to see, and we were like all, like little Cagney
Yeah.
and Lacey chicks. But we
Yeah.
just sat back and watched all the high council and the stake presidency. And it was a packed house. His family came from out of state. It was a big, huge thing. And he was very well supported. And I sat there going, you have got to be kidding me. And people don't know this, but afterwards, I saw him go out because he took our family van. So he left my mom with this little teeny car. So he even took the family van and he's out there and he's loading up all his gifts, right? And he's by himself. And so I walked up to him
Oh my gosh.
and I said, "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Dad, you're trying to start a new life when you've left a mess behind. You need to do something." And he's like, "Well, you don't believe in God and repentance." And I said, and then his wife comes walking. And she's like, "Honey, just ignore her and come on inside." And I
Honey.
was like, "Oh no, I'm not going to be ignored." And she's like, "Yeah, I've forgiven him. Why can't you forgive him?" And I go, "Oh, did he molest your kids too? Like, why do you need to forgive him?"
I love you.
And so I know that's me. And so
I have to say, and this is why I interview women 16 above, because your Cagney and Lacey reference, nobody, it's kind of like when RFM makes all these references and everybody's poor Bill, is kind of going, I don't understand what you're saying. And we're like, we get it. We got it. Okay. We got it. But you're amazing. So
I was going to follow them in.
Yeah.
Right. And then I thought, no, I'm going to choose peace for the moment. and I'm
Mm.
going to go back to my little sisters,
Mm.
and talk to my mom. And they were crying. My
Oh.
mother was bawling because she couldn't believe, that she was being ostracized. And our bishop at the time, because we were all still in that one ward, he was showing, some sympathy. I found out later, to my mother, and my
Mm.
sister. I was pregnant at the time, and she was a minor, and he was really trying to help them. And I guess the stake president told him, "We're handling this, so you need to cut it off."
Definitely.
Yeah.
So,
So
and
yeah,
tell the story. So your mother went in and asked for help, right? Or was it you that went in and asked for help? I can't remember. I think
yeah. Years later, I did when I was a
yes.
single parent, but my mother was getting some help from the bishop,
Uh-huh.
with for her and my sister, because we had all been kicked out, and
Yeah.
we were looking for places to live. But they did help, my sister Corey and my mom for a while, and till Corey was able to give up her child for adoption and stuff. And so eventually, my brother Kyle was let back into my mom's house, and Kathy eventually returned to my mom. I was never allowed back,
Oh,
because my mother held a lot of resentment for me,
yeah.
for telling. Even though she was very brave, she resented
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And so, but the bishop,
It
and
reminds me of the abuse that happened in Arizona, and that whole brouhaha. And that woman went to jail, and she served her 2 years. I think she went to jail. He committed suicide. Wimp. He committed suicide in jail. She served her time, but people held her responsible for what
they do.
happened, and they don't take under consideration the abuse and the mental abuse that these women are also going through. It's almost like they should have been strong enough to do this or strong enough to do that, and they don't hold the man responsible. They say you should have done something, and then they get held responsible for their behavior, not taking into any kind of compassion or consideration of the mental torture that they've also been put through.
Yeah, and I understand that too, because I saw my mom go through that. However, I think because she only got 2 years, showed a little bit of mercy from the courts, because I truly believe that if you're the other parent and you are aware of it, and I
Yeah.
know that there's mental abuse, I saw my mother go through it. My mother
Yeah.
attempted suicide twice, and
Gosh.
people don't know that. Once when I was 7 and once when I was 16. And so it's horrendous. However, bottom line, we are responsible for our children. It is
Yeah.
up to us at any
Yeah.
cost to save
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And we do have to keep in mind, and I think the courts now, with the different types of courts, they have mental health court,
Yeah.
veterans court, things like that. They do keep in mind now more than ever,
Right.
that there's mental health that you have to consider, which I think is important.
Yeah.
But yeah, but bottom line, we as parents are definitely responsible for keeping our children safe no matter what.
Absolutely. And I remember going to a lawyer with a ex-wife of one of my kids. And because I am just one of these optimistic la la land people that just kind of goes along, and I'm just like believing everything everybody tells me. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that sounds right. La, la, la. And so she's telling me all this stuff. She had a child from a previous marriage, and oh, she talked about the horrific things that happened to her and blah, 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 and how he had custody of the boy. But she would get him every once in a while. So because she was now married to my son, he was introduced to us. And this was like my first grandchild, and so I was, let's go Halloween, and I was so, but then I started to see things, and I was like, okay, this is kind of odd because it's Halloween. You were going to bring him over. We were going to have a party. We were going to take him trick-or-treating, but now you're dumping him so you can go to a party. And what about the 3-year-old? And so I started to kind of break through her facade. So we went to a lawyer because she was pulling all this stuff about not getting custody. And for the first time, my eyes were open because the lawyer sat there and listened to her story. And obviously she had experience, and so she could see through her BS. And so she said, well, I have to say, if that was my kid, I'd be walking over glass to make sure I spent the time I was supposed to have with him. And I was like, bong, and I saw through all her lies and everything that she had been saying. And it was just, I don't know why, beautiful women like you, they can see it. And there's oblivious people like me that go, well, that sounds right. Yeah.
Well, because on
And
a normal day to day,
yeah.
not everybody goes through things like this, but it's more prevalent than we truly
Oh,
know.
that's
But
what
the
we're
fact that,
seeing.
yeah, and the fact that, the partners are, the parents, the other parent being held accountable, for that. And, I believe the criminal justice system, and this is part of like all these cover-ups. I don't understand it,
Yeah.
especially, in the Mormon religion, Catholic, everybody, why they choose this particular crime to be the one that they back up, like to
Yeah.
cover up. And
Yeah.
the fact is, like, people who do this kind of thing have to realize it is a crime. And jail time is pretty much necessary for them in order for them to truly get some kind of a glimpse into what they did. Because if you don't do that and you cover it up and you just say, oh, we're going to work with them and everybody forgive, and that's another separate thing, is like people don't understand what that real, repentance and forgiveness, because there's accountability. And if you
Yes.
skip out
Yeah.
and that one important step, then people don't realize they're not forced to look at what they did. And
Yeah.
then it becomes minimalized, and then there's other victims,
Yeah.
you know?
And that reminds me, you brought up something that I thought again, that was like, you said, it's interesting that they have an abuse hotline.
Yeah.
Then, so tell everybody what you said, because I was
Well,
like,
yeah. And I
oh,
was doing
yeah.
an interview one time when they were asking me about the mandated reporting law in Utah,
Yeah.
because I was like, yeah, like they make a big deal. They pick the crime of child sexual assaults um, to make a big hotline for. And I'm like, well, where's their hotline for, robbing a bank? Or where's their hotline for tax evasion? Or where's their hotline, for murder? I mean, when all these people, and if there's a clergy privilege, um, you know, do they call the hotline or Kurt McConkie or whoever that hotline is and report, hey, I've got a guy who just, robbed a bank. He's got $1 million in his trunk. Can you tell me, what are we supposed to do with
Should
it?
I do?
Could you imagine? Well, here's our legal responsibility. Or I've got a family who's no longer living, and this guy came in, and well, do we go in? Do we help
Yeah.
him? Like, why is it child sexual assaults that is their main focus
Yeah.
of cover up?
Yeah.
Why do they have so much mercy
Yeah.
for these perpetrators? Well, we don't want to ruin their reputation. What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
What about the babies? What about these
Yeah.
children? They're being
Yeah.
exposed. Their lives are
Yeah.
forever changed.
Yeah.
Not that there's not hope for them, but they have now damaged a part of their life. Why are
Yeah.
you worried about the bishop's reputation? No, the church is worried about their reputation. Now, here's
Yeah.
my thing. Why not be the church that
Yes.
sets the example for all
Yes.
other religions, where you don't harbor these guys? Why
Right.
don't you be the church that says, we don't do that here? I myself am going to walk you down to the police station. I'll sit with you so that you can make a confession to the police. I'll be there for you. We'll come and help you in court. We'll hold your hand, but you have got to be processed criminally.
Yeah.
That's what that church and any religion should do. Help
Yeah.
them repent. If that's your thing, help them do it
Yeah.
by making them accountable.
Yeah. And I think it was Alicia on TikTok. She made a comment, and I thought that this is also beautiful. I'm sorry, it's the women. The women on TikTok are so profound. But she said, when the 2015 policy came out, and Nelson stood up and announced it, and Monson has dementia, but they're hiding that, and nobody knows that he's completely incapacitated, and that's a secret. It's not a what did he say? Well, we don't call it a secret. We call it confidential. I love that. That's my favorite part of the whole 60 Minutes thing
They're
with
lying
the
for the
SEC.
Lord.
Yeah.
They lie for the Lord.
Yeah. So he
That's
comes
right.
out and he makes a policy that kids, who have parents that are gay cannot be baptized. And, she said, but if your parents are serial killers and, your dad happened to be Ted Bundy, you can be baptized. We don't care if you have, parents that are drug dealers, they're both in prison. And yeah, you can be baptized. We love you. We'll take care of you. But gay? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because, and she said that, and I thought that's a really good point, but and the other thing too, and it wasn't just the church, but it is the church, because when in the documentary, you call the police. I mean, Kim is like, we're calling the police right now. The police come to the home. Your dad goes, hi, yeah, my kids are here because I SA'd, and they're confronting me. And the police are like, so tell everybody like what they said they were going to do. And then what actually happened.
Yeah. So they took our statements, the police. It was interesting because they were all lined up and came in the house like they were like SWAT or something.
Yeah.
And so they came in, and then my dad, they took his statements, and he was confessing all this stuff, and they weren't writing anything down. And I didn't notice that till later, because we wrote things down, you
Yeah.
know. And so he was, one of the things he said, well, it was only at night.
Oh,
And they're like this.
oh, that makes a
And I'm
difference
thinking,
between 7 and 9, or was it 7:30 and
is there a time
9:30?
period
Because
that's off the clock?
yeah,
Yeah. So that was interesting. But they said, after they were gathering all their information and all that, they pulled me out on the porch, and the main guy there who had worked with Special Victims Unit, said, we cannot arrest him. And he said, but he said, I've noticed all these kids running around out here. And he said, I promise you that my officers and I will go door to door. We will let them know, and we'll talk to the kids and see if there's anybody talking about any abuse. And he said, and he said, so I can't arrest him, but I can do that. And I promise you I'll take care of that. And I said, okay. And then he asked me, can we leave? And I'm like, okay. And he said, well, what I'm asking you, is your dad going to be okay? Is he going to hurt himself? And I'm like, no, he doesn't hurt himself. And then they go, are you going to hurt him? And I'm like, well, if I was going to hurt him, that would have been.
Let me get my book out here. Yes, at 3:45, we're planning on beating the crap out of him. We're going to tie him up at 7:45, and that.
I was like, no one's going to hurt him. We would have done that already. But I was just like, no, we're not here for that. And what's interesting, and I've never shared this with anybody, is, they left and we went back in. And so we were getting ready to leave. And I said, Dad, they're not going to arrest you. And he started screaming. He was freaking out. He was reacting the same way he reacted years earlier when we told him our sister Corey was pregnant. And he wigged. I mean, throwing stuff, freaking out. So here we are years later. We're sitting across from him. They're not going to arrest you, Dad. And he's like, why not? Why are they going to arrest me? And I'm like, is this for real? How he's acting? And he was crying and he was screaming. And my brother Kim, I look at him and he's like, I don't know if he's doing that for the camera. And I go,
why would he
for a
want to be arrested?
moment. Yeah, he was very upset that they didn't take him.
Right.
And for a moment, I thought, wow, I think he really is ready to face, maybe, I was thinking, maybe what he did, and wanted to be arrested. And so he was very upset about that. And so you see in the film where we go and we hug him, because, that was my way of transferring, what he had done to me back onto him. I was taking my power back, and that's why I hugged him. And I said, I always loved you, because I did, because there were some good parts of our life that were beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I was acknowledging that. And I knew that I would never see him again. And I thought, I'm giving you what I've been carrying for decades. So I'm going to give that back to you. And however you are going to deal with that, that's on you now going forward, because I don't know what else to do. you
Yeah.
know? And so it really felt good to take my power back. And it was like a physical, emotional thing. And I felt very empowered by that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Kathy hugged him and then Kim hugged him. And then, you know, and then also we were about to leave and that neighbor lady comes back over
Yeah.
and she goes, "How dare you do this to your dad? He looked forward to this visit." And we're like, okay, first of all, you're of no importance to this story. You know,
Yeah.
you're kind of overstepping your bounds. I don't know what connection you have to my dad. I
Yeah.
don't know who all those kids are that were running around in the house. Um, but I just thought, there's not something right about you. And we're just going to ignore that. You know, I'm not even going to acknowledge what you're doing. And so we said goodbye and then we left. And then later we found out that very next day after we had left, this neighbor lady and my dad started the process of putting all of his assets into her name, including his home, his accounts. And I thought, that's why you yelled at us,
Yeah.
because you have a stake in all this, you know.
A
And
stranger.
our dad had promised, during that conversation, he promised to help us.
Right.
You know, and he acted repentant, you know, like I'll give you my home, whatever you need, you know,
Yeah.
whatever you suffered, let me help you. And we were happy about that. So there was an expectation that at some point, and then when it had been months and months and we hadn't heard from him. When we reached out, he's like, "Well, I have nothing. I can't help you." And we're like, and then that's when we found out he had turned it all over to her.
Everything was so she had like power of attorney, and then he had put her name in his will as receiving her house afterwards.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff. There was trusts that were made with her and her husband's name. And yeah, it was very, very interesting. And yeah, and I was going to tell you something else too that kind of tied in with that, with the whole.
Because Kathy was supposed to get
behind the
something,
scenes.
and then like you say that they found out that the neighbor lady had all of the assets. And
Yeah, so that was very, very interesting that he did that. And I thought, yeah, oh, that's what I was going to tell you is, you know, when my mom, you know, my dad was made to leave the house by my mother, you know, even though he was hiding out, but he had our electricity turned off. She went to the bank and he had taken all their money, you know, and here she's got these younger kids. And I'm thinking, that is not a repentant man.
yeah.
That's a caught man.
Yeah.
It was angry that we reported it.
Yeah. So this is not a man who loved his family, really wanted to serve his family, but his wife wasn't giving him enough sex. So he had to turn to his daughters, but he loved his family and wanted to do the right thing. No, this is a con man who had no integrity. He was a thief. He was a narcissist, and he was an abuser. And it was like, but let's honor him because he's a man. He loves the priesthood. We must work. We must help him. So talk about this beautiful sister that you had that's in the documentary. And here she is in this documentary. She's healthy. She's vibrant. She's, you know, talk a little bit about where she was at when you were making the documentary and then what happened. Oh, and people are asking, the second wife you mentioned, how many years younger was she than he?
She wasn't all that younger than him. She wasn't like a young student that produced kids. Like she was a grandmother.
Okay. So then, and she was in Alzheimer's. So this whole time the documentary she was kind of in a back room.
She was like in the basement room.
Yeah.
And we didn't, yeah. Cause he was like, you want to go see her and visit her and talk to her? And we're like, no, we're not here for that. Like, what part are you disconnected of why we're here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we didn't know. Yeah. And she died soon after that. And you know, another thing is he took all of her accounts because she had separate accounts. He had those put into his name, and then he turned those over to the neighbor lady as well. So
are her kids going after anything? Because
I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think we should be talking to that neighbor lady. I think somebody ought to be talking to her.
Yeah, the documentary people went to her and said, I just want you to know why we were there, you know, and this is what was going on. And she was not interested in talking and didn't care.
All about the money.
Yeah. So Kathy, we did not know. She got sick right after, we filmed that scene, and she wasn't feeling good. Now, Kathy had been married in her early 20s, and her marriage, and I'm just going to be really honest, her marriage was not good, and they were off and on. And she had left him several times through the years, was in a domestic violence situation, left with her little ones, went out of state several times. So, you know, about before we knew she was sick, she had been, living in her own place for a while and dating and stuff. And, her husband had started stalking her. And, he was sending her text messages, which I actually have a copy of, because the things that he was saying to her were very detrimental and very scary. And I went with her down to the courts, to file a restraining order um, against him. And they did grant a restraining order, but it was a temporary one. And then he threatened her that, if she divorced him and went through with it, that he would bury her in a place in Mexico that no one could ever find her body. And she was scared. And yeah, it was a really hard time for Kathy during all of this. And then she came down, with brain cancer. And it was hard for her.
Yeah.
And so, I spoke before about that meeting in the hospital. Like when I went to go visit her, because they were doing all these tests and they were asking her if she wanted to do chemo and all that. Well, I noticed that he was showing up in her hospital room.
Hmm. Now, is this in California? Is this
Yeah.
happening in California? Okay.
So he's showing up I'm just going to call him the ex, even though they weren't, divorced. But he was showing up in her room, and I was like, are you okay, Kathy? And she's like, yeah, he comes every day and he just sits there. And I'm like, well, you can talk to somebody and get him out of here. And she goes, well, I don't know what he's going to do. And I'm like, you need to talk to the nurse, charge nurse, or whoever. And then he would leave for a while, and then I guess he was coming back. And then there was this big meeting called for everybody to come in with the surgeons and everybody. And they had tried to see how bad it was, and no chemo, nothing was working. And that's where they gave her the 6 weeks that she had left. And that was very devastating. Now, he was not there, but his parents were in that meeting, and his sister was there, and my brother Kim was there. And so the nurse is like, the surgeon's telling her, we've done everything we can, and are you understanding this diagnosis that we're giving you? She said, yeah. And so she started crying, and then they said, do you have a power of attorney? And she said, yeah, my brother Kim. And so they were filling out the paperwork, because they brought in everything to get it notarized. And she says, he'll make all my decisions going forward. And so there was all that and a lot of tears. And at one time, Kathy's like, I can't believe it. Like, I work out and, I can't believe it. Like, how am I the one? I'm the youngest. And I go, oh, so it should have been the older chubby sister, and then we just started laughing. And the nurses are like looking at us, and I'm like, like you said, this is what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we had that moment. And so that night I called the film people and let them know it was bad, and I had mentioned before that they drove all night, because Kathy had never seen any clips of the film. They were still working on it.
Yeah.
So they drove all night to get there so that they could show her on the computer some clips to let her know, like, hey, you did great, and stuff. And so by the time they arrived in California, and I had talked to Kathy that morning in the hospital, and she's like, do you think you could spend the night and we could have like a little slumber party? And I was like, of course, and I said, Amanda and Jared are here, the film people, they're going to show you stuff. So she was really happy. And by the late afternoon, when we got to the hospital, the nurse would not let us in for me to take a drink. And this is where women need to really, or anyone, man or woman, who's in a domestic situation, okay, about following through with restraining orders and divorces. Okay. But we got there and the nurse goes, yeah, you can't come in and see her. And we're like, what's going on? And she goes, oh, she filled out a form and said, she doesn't want to see you. And I'm like, I just talked to her a few hours ago. And I go, I don't know what you're talking about. And I go, wait a second. Is her ex, like, is he here? She goes, yeah, he's in the room with her. And I said, can I see the form that she filled out? And it said something to the effect like, I don't want to see any of my siblings. I only want to see my husband, my children, and I want nothing to do with my family, like us. And I said, was her husband in the room when she wrote this? She goes, yeah, he was telling her what to write and just had her sign it. And I'm like, okay, people, where's the person that's been trained in trauma for domestic violence victims? Where's that advocate for the hospital?
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is so illegal and so wrong. And I said, there's a restraining order. And she's like, well, you'll need to produce it. And so Jared's on the computer, the guy, I love Jared. He was on the computer and trying to download stuff in the courts, and doing all this stuff so that we could produce something for them. So he did produce a document and they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get the husband out of there. And they had to get security, but they got him in another room and they allowed us to go back in and see Kathy. And when I went in there, Kathy did not look right. And she wasn't laughing. She was very serious. Her face had broken out and she was kind of paralyzed on one side.
Oh my
God.
God.
And she kept repeating, he's a good man. He's a good man. And I go, Kathy, not hear about him? How are you? We love you. Here's the film, people. They want to show you the film. I was trying to just make it about the moment, because I was going to get to the other stuff. But she just kept saying, he's a good man. And I said, okay, Kathy. And she goes, he made me talk to Dad on the phone.
What?
And I go, what? And I go, and then I thought, well, maybe it's the medication. Like, I'm thinking, how would my dad know to call her? Or, so I was confused by that, which I found out later. He did call the hospital and he did make her talk to her that day. And he told Kathy, her husband, told her that the reason she was given cancer is so that my dad could find Jesus.
Oh.
And she was required to forgive him on the phone. So not only did that all happen within a few hours, yeah. So I'm like, what in the hell is going on? So I just told Kathy, we were like, we love you. And she was not in any sort of way to look at any of the clips because she had this guy in the next room who was coming back, hovering, and whatever these staff members allowed happen at the hospital, it was just atrocious.
Right.
And so I had, I said goodbye to her, went out to the hallway, and the charge nurse goes, so is that normal behavior for her? And I go, no. I said, she's traumatized. This guy has threatened her life in the past. Why is he here? There's a restraining order. She goes, well, it's a temporary restraining order. And then she said, so I don't think it's still in effect. And I go, well, they've been separated for years. They don't live together. She's in love with somebody else, and she's like, yeah, well, by law, if you're still married, your spouse, no matter who's the power of attorney, it doesn't matter. So we went back the next day. My brother Kim, he brought registered stuff from the courts and everything. And they just said, nope, you're not going to see her. So while we're sitting in the lobby, her husband peeks out the door, where they allow people to go through to that unit. And he's letting in cousins from his family. And he's waving to us, knowing that we can't go in and see her. And I'm just bawling. And Kim's like, just hold it together. And so we left. And so my brother Kim was dealing with like administration at the hospital. Like, we've got to do something. And then we got the phone call. I got the call from Kim saying, I came down to the hospital and they released Kathy to her husband. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. He goes, they sent her home to die. Like, they're putting her on hospice. And I'm like, where is she going? Like, because he doesn't have his own place. So I'm thinking he's staying at his parents'. So
He
we
doesn't
sent
even have his own place. That's even
Yeah.
more, you know.
We went, so I called the cops and I said, look, I need to do a welfare check. I don't know where my sister is. She's been released. So they went out there. I go, I think she could be at the parents' home. So anyway, they went over there and his mother said, no, she's not here. They should know where she's at. And so they came back to us and they go, we don't know what you're pulling, but they said, you know where she's at, but she's not there. And I'm like, where is she? So we spent months going through, like, has she died? We tried to work with, I called Adult Protective Services. I said, here's what my sister looked like in the hospital. She was barely 90 pounds. Could you go over back to that house and see if she's living there? And when they went over there, there's somebody named, they said was named Kathy, was sitting in a chair, but she was really heavy. And she had a partially shaved head and was like real rough and said, you get out of this house and I don't want to be bothered. And my sister's a liar. And the person with social services called me back and they go, we don't think it's her. And I go, I don't know what to do. And she goes, we don't either. We have no proof that that's her. And so we did not know where she was. Now, in the meantime, we're going to Utah to have our premiere for the first part of the film and to sue my father and announce the lawsuit against him in federal court in Utah. So that's when we were having our news conference. So we're sitting there not knowing where my sister Kathy is, if she's alive. It's now my brother's birthday that they have this news conference on, Kevin's, which I thought was ironic.
Yeah.
And, we have the news conference and then our story went viral. But keeping on the point here is that would have been in June, late June. Late July, Kim receives a text message from her husband and said she's on her last days if you want to come say goodbye. And he's like, where is she? And he goes, at my parents'. And so they allowed Kim to go see her and Kim called me and he's like, they're going to let you come see her. And he goes, it's not good. So he goes, really watch your reactions because he's watching your reaction to what's going on with her. So I went over there and he let me in and the house is all clean, but we go to this really back bedroom and I have to be really nice to him.
Oh my
So
gosh.
good to see you. Thank you so much for calling us. Thank you for letting me see her.
Yeah.
And I walked in, they opened the door, and the first thing I noticed, it smelled of cat urine.
Oh.
Kathy's allergic to cats. And the room was filthy. There was laundry all over. She was sitting in a bed with just a sheet and one of his t-shirts and a diaper.
Oh.
And her head was swelled really bad. And she just had bits of hair poking out. And he goes, hey, Kathy, your sister's here. And by that time, she was blind.
Oh my gosh.
And so I sat down next to her and I grabbed her hand and I said, it's Kristy. And she goes, oh my God, is my sister here? And I thought, oh my God, okay, good. So she just started crying and he's watching, so I'm just holding her and I go, Kathy, I love you. And I leaned in her ear and I go, I've been looking for you. I've been looking. And so she goes, I love you. And I said, I love you too. And we talked for a while and he just stood right there. And I started talking to Kathy about, remember when you were little and you were afraid of this? And I told some funny stories and she just started busting up laughing. Her husband goes, wow, she hasn't laughed in a really long time. And I'm like, wow, okay.
You think?
All righty. Yeah. And so then I'm just talking to her and then she started screaming and holding her head. And I said, oh, hey, do you guys have some medicine for her from her doctor? And he said, no. And I go, well, she doesn't have any medication. And he said, no. And I said, well, do you have her doctor's number? Maybe we can call him. And he goes, I don't know where it is. And I said, well, let's look for it. And then Kathy started, vomiting and
Oh my God.
all sorts of stuff. And I said, we need to get someone here, either call 911, and he said, oh, I don't want to do that. And I said, well, okay. So I called Kaiser Emergency and I said, here's the situation. And they said, where is she? And so they sent somebody over right away, a nurse. And the nurse came in and was angry. And she's like, you've not brought her in. And so they were pulling up all sorts of stuff on a laptop. And they said, how long has she been this way? And he goes, oh, just today. And they said, nope. And so they said, who can go over to the pharmacy because they're issuing her morphine, you know. And so they gave her all sorts of medication. They said only liquid form, no pills, So I ran over there and got that and then came back and they were administering her medication and quieting her down, and he did not like that. And so during the night, so I had to leave, and I just said, I'm going to be back in the morning. And on my way over in the morning, her daughter texted me and said, my mom fell out of bed last night and my dad wouldn't pick her up. He just let her lay there because he said he couldn't pick her up till his father woke up to help pick her up and put her back in bed. And I had to watch my reaction. And I said, oh, these things happen, honey. I'm on my way. I'll be there in a few minutes. And so I got there and they were just putting her back into bed. And I just sat with her and all that stuff. And he was asking me like, I don't know where, she wants to be buried. I don't know what to do. And, my family has this plot that they, ordered years ago. And I was like, okay, well, do you want me to go talk to them? And because Kathy was now stabilized and she seemed like she was getting really out of it. So, yeah, so we called our aunt who wanted to say goodbye to her. My little grandson came over to say goodbye. And she was kind of, interacting with them. And then, my brother Kim and his kids came over and we played her favorite music and talked to her. And we all gathered hands and said a prayer, which he didn't want to be present for, her husband. So we all prayed for her comfort. And, everybody said goodbye to her. And right before my brother got there, and my aunt is still sitting there, my dad's aunt, who is just wonderful, his sister. Martin went over to Kathy because she started yelling again. And I said, Martin, you're supposed to give her the morphine every so often. He goes, oh, we're out of it. And I'm like, we just got it last night. And so he literally, I don't mean to traumatize anybody, but this is important. He started slapping her face really hard. He's like, Kathy, open your mouth. And he stuck a big pill in there. And I go, Martin, she's not supposed to be on pills. I don't know what you're doing, but I had to be kind. Yeah. Right. And I said, hey, Martin. And my aunt goes, could you get me out of here, please? And my son's like, I'm going to do something, Mom. And I said, no, I'm going to make some phone calls. We're going to be okay. We're just going to be calm. And so I said, hey, Martin, let me help. Let me help her. And that's when I called Kim and I said, how far out are you? And he goes, we're around the corner. I said, get here. So then we had a family meeting and met with her and loved on her and said goodbye. And I said, you guys, I'll be back in the morning, and that morning when I got home, I had made calls to Adult Protective Services. And I said, get over there. Here's what's happening. Here's what's going on. They're out of morphine already. They're not out of morphine. He won't give it to her. And he's hurting her. He's allowing her to do this. He's getting her back. And so anyway, they sent people over there. But before I could get there in the morning, he sent a text saying, you will not be allowed on the premises in my parents' home, or I'll have you arrested. Oh, okay. He threatened Kim. He threatened me. And then his daughter got on there and said, you're not allowed to see my mom. You won't be going to her funeral. And so we made all the phone calls we could, but we weren't allowed to go in. And So a couple weeks passed, and I'm a mess. And then I finally went down to the police station myself, and I said, you need to go check on my sister. I don't know if she's still alive. And here's where you talk about God and miracles happening in the universe. The two cops drove up. They said, park down the street from her house. So I did. And these two cops came up. They were very kind. And I said, here's the restraining orders. Like, here, they go, why did they release her to him? I said, we don't know, but she's dying. And I said, I need you guys to go in to see what's happening. And so they were there for quite a while. And then they came down the street. And this other cop drove up who was a jerk. And he started yelling at me, how dare you interrupt their peace? How dare you? And so these other two cops are like, dude, shut up. Like, we got this, leave. And so one cop was not dressed like all the other cops. So there are these two cops, right? And he goes, I want to tell you something. I'm a chaplain for the police. And he goes, I was able to see your sister. And by the way, when they drove up on the house, all these cop cars drove up with their lights. So I don't know why they did that, but they were trying to make a point with the family. So anyway, they're talking to me, and the chaplain goes, I want you to know that I saw your sister. And he goes, and you said that you were with your mom when she died. And he goes, you know that in between stage where they're like here, but they're not really here? He goes, she's there and she's not in any pain. He goes, I want you to know that Kaiser or whoever the workers came in, APS has been down here. The cat stuff was cleared up. The room is clean. They've been taking care of her around the clock. She feels no pain. So I want you to be assured of that. He said, now God has given me a word for you. If you're a believer, can I share that? And I said, sure. And he said, God wants you to know kudos. And I go, kudos? He goes, yeah. He goes, you've done everything you can as a sister for her. And he goes, you did everything you could. You fought. You tried to help her. And he goes, and guess what? He's got her now. And you need to go on and find peace with this and know you did everything you could and go on in your life. And he loves you, but you're going to, everything's going to be okay. And so I think it was like the next day I went down to my mom's grave in Kevin's. And it's interesting that right when I was there, we got word that Kathy passed. So she went, and we weren't allowed at the funeral. And so my brother Kim and I did our own memorial for her at his house, and all her nurse friends came, and cousins and stuff. So
That's amazing.
yeah.
I think the most amazing thing is tell everybody what you do now. Tell everybody what you do for a living, because I think the trauma, I mean, what you have seen makes anything that you see on television look like a cartoon. I mean, this is a Dateline, whatever, more horrific than anything that I've ever seen. And the systems that failed her, how many systems failed both you and her? A church, a hospital, a police force, city people, just, systems that are set up, like you say, to, CPS and adult CPS or whatever they call it, that you mentioned that you called. How many systems failed her? And the false security that we have, thinking that there are things out there that we could call this person, we could call the police, we could call hospital administration. Obviously, there's a trauma person on staff. We could call adult protective services. I'm sure there's services out there that would help. And the bottom line is no. That is the scary reality. So tell everybody what you do now after all of this.
Yeah, I work for a county agency as a family advocate. And so people whose families are involved who have trauma or, substance abuse, or they're suffering, those family members who are supporting them in whatever capacity also need support. And so whether that's going to court with them or we hold support groups for them, we do everything we can as a peer support to go in and help them. And I don't have any degrees, and they're hiring the way they hire people is through your lived experience, because you are somebody who has lived through it, either as a victim yourself or survivor or as a family support. And when you have that kind of lived experience, people need you. They need to have somebody who gets it, who can, get them in touch with resources and to be by their side and walk them through while their family member or loved one is also getting the support that they need from whatever service. And so to be a part of that and to see these new programs be developed through the state and counties is actually, life-changing for me to be on that side of being something that maybe I never received, or my sister wasn't able to do that, have that. And so it's really nice that they have things like that, because there is a lot of support now. What I don't understand is how people are not connecting as fast as they should with it. The word is starting to get out. There is a lot of things that have been developed in a lot of states and throughout the United States. So there's all these programs, but it's like getting the word out, or if you live in certain counties, are they better than other counties? But it can be very triggering and the days are long. But I'll tell you to, be paid for something that you would want to do anyway. And, I want to talk about, there's like all this artificial intelligence and everybody's like all electronic. And, I don't think I'll ever be able to keep up with all that. But the one thing that no one can take from me is my lived experience as a human being. And that's what I can offer the world going forward. I may not know all the other stuff, but I have my heart and my experience. And as human beings, we need that. There will always be a demand for that.
And like you were saying, artificial intelligence cannot replace the person sitting next to you with their hand on your arm or around your shoulders, telling you, I know what you're going through. I know what you're doing. Let me tell you. And just the things you did for your sister, knowing who to call. Well, this is what we can do, or how to act, or how to try to be present, but not offend. And that takes experience and training. And that's something that cannot be replaced with someone that's not human. But the fact that, like you said, the fact that, yes, you are reliving probably every day when you associate with these people that are going through traumatic experiences, you yourself are reliving that, and yet you are using that for good. And I think that's amazing.
They also train us too that self-care is so vital. You don't know how important it is to step aside every day, make time for yourself, find your inner peace, get grounded, and if you need time away from people, if you need to just go take a bath, like do whatever you have to do in order to really ground yourself, because we as humans are powerful. We are incredible. The power that we can, people need to find their spiritual base, find meaning and purpose in life, but to also, whatever that looks like, because it looks like different for everybody maybe, but you need to honor that and honor yourself, because you can't help other people if your cup is empty. So you really need to learn to take care of yourself mentally, emotionally. I'll always be in counseling. I know that. I've accepted that. It's just the way it is. So
I think those are so, we hear those words, but coming from somebody like you who does this for a living, who's still working with family members that are going through traumatic things, but then you're also acknowledging that you do have to do things to take care of yourself and to be able to do what you do. And I appreciate that, because it's not just coming from Oprah, it's coming from somebody that's in the trenches.
Yeah, because, sometimes we try to stay real busy. That's what I was finding out. I was trying to just be real busy so I didn't have to think a lot, or, but you're not doing yourself a service, just like these perps. You're not doing them any service by not allowing them to be processed through the criminal justice system. You're making excuses for them, making it okay. No.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you said too. And if this does nothing but remind the women who are going through something like that, that you have to follow through, that letting a divorce or letting any kind of legal procedure just go, oh, well, oh, well, oh, well, until something traumatic happens. And then it's too late.
Right. Look at my sister. If she had
Yeah.
been divorced, my brother would have been her power of attorney. We would have brought her home and taken care of her like we did my mother, and gave her a beautiful last journey of life like we did my mom. But
Yeah.
she did not have that.
Yeah. So it's so important to take, and that's part of the self-care, is standing up for yourself. And that's where, and and I love if we can just for just a second, right before we close here, you have a strong faith belief still. You have left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but it wasn't due to historical or even the horrendous way you were treated by the church. It wasn't necessarily that. Tell everybody where the day that you went, I'm done with
Yeah. Well, my first, it's when I had been a single mom and I'd lost my job, and I went into my bishop, and I had some strange bishops. I've also had really good ones, but I went in and just asked for help, and he made the comment that, if you would have been married in the temple, 8 years ago, you wouldn't be going through any of this, and I thought that's kind of the last straw for me. And I didn't leave the church over that, because, people are imperfect. That you're always going to find one of them that's going to say something weird.
Yeah.
But I did take some time, and I did do some studying, and was disturbed by the historical parts. And so in the end, I left after great prayer and realizing that a lot of stuff was fraudulent. And, Anne was devastated because it interfered with my feelings about God. And then I was able to have a very beautiful experience, which one day I'll write about, where I found that God very is real and exists, and had an experience that I'll never be able to deny. And so that's carried me through. And so my belief, really mimics, I guess, kind of Christianity, really. But I don't believe in religions and things like that, and everybody, you don't judge anybody because it's their journey with their creator.
Right.
But I am a very spiritual person, and I take time every day because I need to. And I am so appreciative of him for everything I've been blessed with, and the fact that I'm still talking, and I have strength, and we all do. You just got to tap into it, right?
Yeah. That's beautiful. I respect that so much, because after everything, you hear people say, well, I couldn't believe in God because where was God? If there's a savior, where was God when I was 6 years old and being abused? Where was God when I needed this help? But you've somehow been able to reconcile that and find a belief. And I love that. I think that's so beautiful. And I think that's just the most important thing. But the other thing is, you're also a mover and a shaker. So it's you're also still actively pursuing this every single day. And when the bishop said, if you just would have been buried in the temple, did you say, how much time do you have? Because can I tell you about my parents' temple marriage and how that worked out?
23 years.
Could we go through that a little? Stupid comments like that. And, I gave a talk one time at Sunstone, and I talked about this platitudes that people throw out there. Well, he's in a better place. And, well, God needed him more. Or, well, we learn from our trials. Or just the stupid things that people say when they think they're comforting you at a time of grief or something like that. And stupid statement, well, if you would have been buried in the temple, well, if you just would have read your scriptures and said your prayers. And it's like, what can we do to make this stop? These stupid platitudes and this stupid, just blind obedience that people take away all kind of critical thinking or even self-reflection or activity like you. It's like, why don't you do something physically to see if there can be changes made? And when you do that, you might discover, oh, wow, I see a new perspective now, because I'm actively getting myself involved. And I see that maybe things I was taught are not true, because I'm seeing what actually happens in the real world. And so amazing.
Yeah. And, you just have to be really knowing going in that you're going to get a lot of people fighting you and making comments, your family members, may give you a hard time for not leaving it alone, or why do you have to fight everything, or just things that they say. And you're going to have to find your own way and your own peace with it, and find people who've also lived through it and get a lot of support that way. But remain true to yourself. And if you feel like you need to say something, you really should. You've been given a voice if you can find it. Not everybody has that, and that's okay. You might be able to serve and, just be a help to other people. Sometimes people just need to sit with people during their grief.
Yeah.
You don't need to say anything. You just need to maybe just sit there with them in the silence and the sobbing, and not try to rescue them from that, and let them feel it, right? Find their peace however they're going to.
Exactly. Those were some of the stories that I remember when someone was explaining Job. One of the better stories about Job were the friends that just came over and sat with him, and they were just there for them. So they're not entering platitudes. They're not offering solutions. And I love that you talked about, like, the dark humor, is, I think Coco B mentioned in the comments about, our family is the same way. We had a son-in-law that passed away, was in a car accident, and we were shopping with my daughter, his wife, and pregnant with a baby and a little 21-month-old baby. And here we are getting ready for this funeral for this young man, and we're walking through the clothing stores looking for something to wear to the funeral. And of course the Nordstrom's people come up and they're like, "Hi, are we looking for something for any kind of a special event?" And and my daughter and I, like, who's going to tell him? Yeah, my husband was killed yesterday. We're going to his funeral tomorrow. We've just got to find the right outfit,
Yeah.
We just laughed about it, Or my daughter kept, instead of saying funeral, she kept saying reception, for Mike's reception. And she's like, why did I say that? But you have to laugh. You have to laugh. That's what gets us through these things, is being able to just talk about silly things that were said, or silly platitudes that are said, or, but also be active in making a change. You just can't sit and be docile and go, oh, well, that's just God's way, and and I love how you've somehow merged that. You've merged accepting, but also being an activist in the same way. So thank you so much for sharing your story today. It's been amazing. It's been amazing. I feel better now than I did in the beginning, I have to say, because it's a hard topic. It's a hard topic. And the thing that makes it so difficult is it's just so prevalent. It's just abundant. And your story mirrors so many other people's stories. And something has to change. And I agree with you. I don't know what is wrong with the church PR system, but it's probably because they've got males. They need to just make the entire, PR section with women that would go, do you know what people would say about the Mormon church if you started standing up and doing fill in the blank? We will not tolerate this. We will be the first to call. We will pay the prosecuting attorney. We will not be defending you. We will be encouraging them. If that's where they put their hard line, can you imagine that people would go, wow, now that is a Christ-driven church.
And what an example to the world, to set a precedence for other religions. Like, you're not, by harboring them, you are doing them a disservice. And isn't church all about repentance and forgiveness? And you're robbing them of that. You're robbing the perp of that. Not said, especially with what they're doing to the victims, survivors, but the fact they're not even helping the people that did wrong. How are they ever going to change or come to terms with it? They're not.
Exactly.
So,
and I remember listening to a rabbi once talk about the difference between Judaism and Christianity as far as forgiveness goes, because the Christianity has this failed idea that Jesus forgave everyone with absolutely no action. And the Jewish religion teaches that forgiveness is given when the people ask for forgiveness and have made differences in their life. And if you choose to forgive that person that has asked for forgiveness, but there has to be action involved.
right.
And I loved that. When they explained that, I thought, well, that kind of makes common sense. But
But their first priority should always be protecting their members, especially the vulnerable adults and children. That should be the priority of all religions. Besides
absolutely.
saving souls or helping people, you need to do that. You have a responsibility I
Yeah.
think on behalf of the creator of the world.
So Kristy, people are asking if there's any way to get in touch with you. So is that something that you want? Do you want to, open that
Sure.
up? Okay.
Yeah,
How
I would totally be open to that. I do have an email they can always reach out to. That's, my first and last name. It's Kristy Johnson, KristyJohnson 2021 at gmail.com. That's a way to do it. Also, we have a website for the film, www.nocrimeinsin.com.
Okay.
And on that, I believe there's a link where you can contact as well. And then there's also up at the top, one of those buttons that say press or something like that. And you can see a lot of our press stories that was picked up by the Associated Press, Huffington Post, Washington Post, Fox, they picked up the story. There's been interviews throughout the years,
Okay.
and then our lawsuits and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of information, but yeah, most definitely you can reach out both ways.
Okay. And it's Kristy Johnson 2021, right? At gmail.com.
But I also
Okay.
have a Facebook account. I have two. There's a personal side, but there's also a public figure side. And I think there's like 11,000 followers right now. But there's that, and you can go there and it shows like my email address as well. And you can click on that and also get through to Messenger as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I will try, as they say, I will put that in the show notes, but I'm always confused when I do live recordings because it automatically goes to YouTube. So if I then go in and load it onto YouTube with my ability to do all the show notes, then I'm up there twice. So I have to figure this out. One of these days I'll get it. So anyway, but thank you so much. And thank everybody. Thank you, Kat and Coco B. And I guess to scroll up, there was another beautiful person that was asking questions. I love it when there's a community that's involved. So it was great. So thank you so much for sharing your story. And we will see you again, I am sure. And I am so mad that you don't still live in that Lehi, Utah area, because we would be going out to lunch every stinking day.
Yeah, you're awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, have a great weekend.
All right. You too.
Bye. I really do feel so much better. Between everything that's happened this last couple of weeks with the stake president being arrested in Pennsylvania, and the Floodlit does such an amazing job bringing these people. I have a neighbor down the street that was in the process of building a home in Flagstaff, Arizona. And after paying upfront for this home and having it just months away from being finished, her construction worker was arrested for child pornography, LDS man in Flagstaff, Arizona. I mean, it's just getting to be an everyday story, and it's tiring. It's exhausting because it's not that difficult to see what needs to be done. There needs to be some consequences to this horrific behavior, and it has to be more than just idle words. And so, but when I know that there's people like Kristy out there, you can't help but find some joy and some hope. So that's what she's given me. And I hope that's what she's given all of you today too. So thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to let you know that I have my podcast, or I have my recording. I'll be recording my interview with Allie Henney this coming week. And Lila, my new co-host, will be able to join us from now on. She still had some stuff she had to put together, so she wasn't able to be with us this week. But next week we will be live again next week with Natasha Helfer. And it's getting close to Valentine's Day. So guess what we're going to be talking about? Let's put Natasha and Valentine's Day together. And then I will let you guess what we're going to be talking about. And remember, this is a podcast specifically demographic women over 60. So yeah, tell your girlfriends, gather around, get some chocolate, meet me at 10 o'clock tomorrow or next Sunday morning. And we're going to talk about some really good stuff with Natasha and Lila. So join me next week. We'll all see you later. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining me today on She Became Visible. Join me each week as my guests and I explore the path of womanhood and tell all our stories. We'll talk about finding the courage to be ourselves and motivate each other to be everything that we're capable of and meant to be, no matter what happens around us. Please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to donate at shebecamevisible.org.